Hello, my name is Pierre de Monthoux. I'm the head of Department of Management Philosophy and Politics at Copenhagen Business School. And we are so interested in the cross-section of design, philosophy and management. It so happens we have a friend visiting, which we're now going to talk to. 2004, he made this video and the book. His name is Dick Boland. He's a professor at Case Western University in the States. And he has had Frank Gehry, the well-known architect, build a new school, a new house for his school. And in this house, he is applying management as designing. And we want to find out how he practically makes this fantastic house and the architect and the philosophy go into management education in a practical way. Let's go and talk to Dick. Buildings and architects coming around and doing fantastic things.
This was what teaching was and what learning was. Now, it just so happened that we have an organization behavior group whose special interest is learning. And we have David Cole, experiential learning, who's been on our faculty for many, probably 20, 30 years at least. And the dean at the time was very involved in transforming the MBA program to be very much geared to bringing a liberalizing sort of element to the typical business school education. So they had some very concrete, specific things to say, and but it also was an opportunity for us to get faculty together and to talk to each other about what is learning, what is teaching. David Cooperrider, who has developed a mode of organizational development known as appreciative inquiry, led processes among the faculty where we worked on applying the appreciative inquiry ideas to our own faculty experience. So one of the techniques would be to sit in small groups and to identify moments when you felt you had really accomplished something important, moments when you really felt alive, where your sense of purpose was just magnified. And so that got us talking about moments in teaching, moments with students when some kind of wonderful sense that an incredible insight had just been gained, that the students' minds were on fire. And one phrase that came out of that actually was hot cognitive economy. And so we were thinking, okay, we want a building where we have a hot cognitive economy. And
that was possible to do with the support of the building and with the support of this whole process of creating the building too. So sort of these pedagogical innovations and
yep.
the innovation in the house sort of seemed to go hand in hand in a marvelous way.
Yeah. So another example would be we said to the architects, because sometimes it was Frank Gehry, but sometimes it was
his partners,
his partners and the project leaders and so on. But the faculty said to them, okay, here's the thing that we like to do when we teach. We want to have a short little period where someone is giving a presentation. It could be the faculty, or it could be a student group. Then we want to have a break where a group of 4 or 6 students can talk about something. Maybe something we've handed out, maybe something that came up in this initial discussion. And then come back as a group and have someone perhaps make a presentation or summarize several of the groups and keep the conversation going from there, and then constantly going back and forth. So what they did was they designed us a room that they call a Las Vegas room. So it's a room that's made with, on one row, the table in front, or the surface in front of the student, is your normal kind of depth, say 18 or 20 inches or something. But then every other row, the table in front of the student is larger than that, about the size of a small table that you might be at in a restaurant or something. So, and then it's a tiered room, but the tiers have 2 rows on each level of the tier. So the outside row of the tier is the narrow tabletop, and the second is a wider one, and so all the faculty has to do is say, turn around and work on your projects. Here's do the following thing. And so then the students in the first row simply turn around, and now they're all sitting at a table. And then
all together, so in deck.
Yeah, and then it's set up so that when you do that, there is the 4 or 6 people who are there. They are all looking at each other. It's not like there's some big long line, and they. Anyway, so it's very effective. A lot of people like to teach in that room. And he also did the sort of common thing, which is surround a lecture hall with little breakout rooms so that people can go out and then come back. But having it being able to happen right in the room is wonderful. And the oval room works that way too, where so every section of the oval has blackboards behind it. So when the students in the first row turn around, they don't have that larger table kind of feeling. But when they turn around, now there's a group of students who have their own whiteboard to work on and mark up. And then, of course, they're pasting things up and drawing things and so on. And then when it's time to have a report out, every group of students around the room has got a display of what they did when they had their little breakout. So very creative problems to real things that in fact, I get to the end of the thing and I say, we told him hundreds, if not thousands of things that we wanted in response to the questions they asked. And I can't think of a single one of any significance that they didn't find a way to incorporate. And that, to me, is a part of managing as designing. Because some of the things that we came up with were difficult, out of the ordinary, challenging. And you can imagine how it would be so simple. A typical manager would say, that's a little too far from our normal practice, so we're not going to do that, right? Or we're going to find some way of reshaping it into something that fits into a familiar pattern. But instead, they took it as a constraint, and it's almost like they enjoyed the complexity and the problem solving that came from it and the need for invention. So that was something that got us thinking, that is what we have to get our students being able to do. And that got us rediscovering design techniques, design methods, and the notion of wicked problems. And so now the faculty is adopting across all disciplines, all of the departments, the notion of the wicked problems that are in their discipline, and teaching students to take an approach that has that goes much beyond the notion that there's going to be a right answer and so on. And you can, if it's so hard to get the students to break away from that, because everywhere they look, they live in a world where supposedly there's a right answer. I mean, even in the middle of the financial crisis, there's competing claims about what is the right answer. And a voice that says, well, we've got to have some experiments. We have to prototype something and test it. That gets denounced in the press as somebody who's incompetent, doesn't know what they're talking about. What you need is an expert who can say, this is what you have to do. So we're working, we end up creating a different sort of environment inside the school where people understand that there are going to be pressures to come up with an answer to a problem that's posed. And the design approach, the design inquiry approach, is to say, let's stop for a minute, let's step back. There is no good reason for rushing to a conclusion here, to rushing to an action. What we want to do is think about how the problem is being framed, play with different reframings. We want to make some observations. You know, is this thing that you're using as your data, you know, these premises that you're building on, where do they come from? Let's go check them out. And invariably, they come up with a different understanding of what the problem is. I mean, this is in a typical business school case. And they come up with reframings that enable them to come up with solutions that are just qualitatively better than the types of things that we used to get. And then the added bonus is they develop ways of presenting their ideas because they have had to learn how to draw pictures of ideas. They have learned how to make a collage to express a complex feeling that can't be easily conveyed in words. And anyway, that's great.
When this is happening in Case Western in the university, during these 7 years that you've been running this, 7, 8 maybe, has there been a diffusion, or has the world outside of Case Western, in other universities, in corporations, so on, been inspired by this thing too? Are they changing as well? So
I think it's something that's in the air, because I would say that yes, for many elements we were one of the first. But there were other places where similar things were brewing. We wouldn't want to say that we were the only place. I think it really is something that was in the air. You know, what we like to think is there was a long period of time from the beginning of the 20th century through to the midpoint. The late 50s, early 60s, where management education became very, it was about manners and culture and traditions being passed on. And then there were some studies, the very famous, the Ford commissions and the Carnegie commissions, that said that this kind of education is not going to do for the future. We need science. We need quantitative studies, and we need analysis, and we need to take a scientific method in management, and that has to permeate the education. So now we're saying, okay, here we are in beginning of the 21st century. We've been very successful in transforming management education, but like a very typical pendulum swinging, it's gone too far. And the thinking that results from having gone too far with analysis is not as good as we can do. We can do better than that. We can create better kinds of organizations. We can come up with better products. We can come up with better understandings of how we create sustainable enterprises and so on. And so that then got us thinking about design as a mode of inquiry that emphasizes the agency that can be played by the manager to reshape the world. And that couples very nicely with appreciative inquiry, which says enough of the deficit thinking, enough of the emphasis on problems. Because identifying and solving problems with organizational structures creates organizations that are highly skilled at producing and reproducing those problems. They measure the problems. The problems never go away. We have whole departments to manage the problems. So instead, appreciative inquiry says, think about those peak moments. Think about the things that made you feel most proud, most excited. Now, let's think of how we can change something in the way we work, the way we arrange things, how we motivate, how we reward people, that will make it more likely that you'll have those experiences again. And then all of a sudden, you are coming up with innovations in the organization that that are much more generative and are not essentially tied to some kind of cybernetic feedback regulation mechanism. But anyway, that's how it all fits.
I'm thinking, of course, when you say experience and we're talking about design, I'm thinking of Dewey, art as experience and stuff like that. And it's, will it be possible to do this thing without, I mean, we have a painting on the wall here. What would it take for us to sort of jump into this painting and be in tune with what the artists have did or stuff like that? Because you are sort of jumping into Frank Gehry's way of working in every classroom situation almost, sort of being in tune with this kind of way of working that he inspired and he.
Well, I should say I should say that we started this 8-9 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's only in the last year and a half that we have gotten a number of faculty to really start to get on board. Only in the last year and a half or 2 years has the school said, okay, we are developing a recognizable theme, and that is design. And we are going to promote the concept of manage by designing. And we formed groups. Just a few faculty from each department is really all it takes to start the ball rolling. So it isn't like every department, every faculty member is doing it. But there are core courses from each department that incorporate design methods and design skills in them. And we are now working to create electives in each department that carry through a design theme and design electives. But it turns out that design inquiry techniques, careful observation of people doing whatever it is you're supposed to be, doing in your case study, whether it's a transportation system or a hospital or merchandising, well, get out there and spend a day. Observe, listen, interview, come back, form some conclusions, raise new questions, go back, collect more data. So, you mentioned Dewey. I mean, really, Dewey is a huge part of what is in the mind of the key faculty that are leading the groups of other faculty that are trying to incorporate design skills in their courses.
So it was a challenge to keep this kind of idea hot, in a sense, during 8 years before it really trickled down. And,
Oh yeah.
there was a little, you were part of a little group fighting for this, or during 7 years until you reached the phase you are in now, where people seem to be interested
there were
in it.
five or six faculty, yeah, who kept it going. We had deans who thought that it was the craziest thing they'd ever heard, and we're going to get rid of this.
How do you
stop this before it ruins the school? Fortunately, there's a very high turnover rate for business school deans, so we're still here, and that dean is gone, and now we have a dean that is incredibly supportive, and you know, if we hadn't come up with the ideas, he would have. I mean, it's a very much in keeping with his approach to education throughout his entire life, so it's a perfect fit.
So if you want design or aesthetics or some kind of artistic practice, something, come into a business school. The thing is to get some faculty in each department involved. Is it about recruitment as well? Do people come to your university and they want to work there because of this?
That's happening now, definitely. Yeah. Oh yes, and students. So now we are promoting for students who want that, and our goal is in a few years to have at least 1/3 of our students there because they want to integrate design. And so we already are getting MBA students who have design backgrounds or who have worked in design coming in for the MBA, and it's just a very exciting time.
In the research as well, sort of research work done by the faculty or PhD work also treats these aspects?
Oh yes. I could tell you. So one of the things about design is to create artifacts. Create artifacts that function better than existing alternatives. So we recently had a PhD student who worked with my colleague Fred Colopy and I and a few others, but she took a technique for building, a software technique for building dynamic graphical visualizations driven by MIDI signals. His technique is based on software out of music, synthesizer type applications. And to take a model that I had created years and years ago about depicting the cycles of purchasing and payment and raw materials and transformation and storage, and then of course logistics and sales and collection of receivables, and then also the hiring and acquiring of capital assets, and the whole financing, short and long-term borrowing and so on. And she took that model and took his software, refined the software, and built a system that would take income statement and balance sheet data in and create these graphical, dynamic graphical visualizations in which the type of movement, the speed of movement, the change of colors, and so on, all depicted changes in the financial information of the company. And then use a technique to morph from one year's financial statements to the next, to the next, to the next. So you have this very neat dynamic. So within less than a minute, you can show 5 years worth of the income statements and balance sheets of a company. And then took the classic studies that had been done on how do you improve decision makers' ability to say when a firm will succeed or fail. How do you make a credit judgment as a banker, for instance, or if you're going to buy somebody's bonds? And So in those experiments, people would take tables of numbers, they'd take time series representations, they'd take graphical images. I'd turn off faces. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but a way of creating facial representations where the elements of the face change as the ratios that you're trying to depict change. At any rate, and so we took the classic data that was used in those studies and the forms of representation used in those studies, and then took the first version of this device, which we call Business Animator. And of course it didn't do very well. But that's okay, because it was a first design prototype. So then we go back and redesign, interview the people who used the device, get their experience, redesign the device again, change to a new color theory, change some of the ways we represented the different ratios and so on. And then we end up with a device that outperforms all the other modes of representation that had been in those previous studies. And outperforms them in the sense of more accurate predictions of what companies are going to succeed or fail, go bankrupt, speed with which the prediction can be made, and overall satisfaction in thinking that they've done a good job and understood what the company's financial condition was. Well, there are no numbers in our representation at all. It is strictly these circles and triangles and moving lines and changing colors and so on. So I think they learn a lot, and it also changes, I think, the whole notion of what is research in management. Because even though we say, oh, we don't believe in one best way anymore, well, true, but we do believe that ways of doing things, certain kinds of budgeting techniques or different kinds of reward systems, that they have effects that we can tell what the effect is, and we can treat it as some kind of stable, universal quality, that this kind of budgeting technique has these effects, this kind has that effect, and so on. So what I think are trying to push in our research is that we can make any form of representation, any form of organization structure, any form of conveying, building teams and so on, better. It isn't the case that a particular form has a particular consequence. Whatever the gross structure is, there is always an opportunity for inventive redesign to improve it, and in fact, we would want to claim you can improve it to outperform any other form.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's a description of a new way of conceiving models for finance, accounting, and so on, and also a new way of conceiving an artwork. Because in a sense, you're describing this model as you could have described Frank Gehry's house. Thanks a lot, Dick, for this, and I hope you'll come over, okay, to us soon again.
Oh yeah, thank you.
That was great, great, great. The management field of finance.
Yeah, yeah. One of the faculty who is really deeply involved now is the chairman of our finance department, a very highly esteemed and accomplished researcher, Peter Richkin, in the area of derivatives and financial engineering. And what he's doing is working with a group of faculty who are also trying to include design skills and methods into their courses. And thinking about how a financial engineering course can incorporate design inquiry skills by, for instance, having the students create a design brief at the beginning of their analysis of a company, in which the strategy of the company, in which the environment in which it's operating, the sort of unique dynamics of the industry and so on, are taken into account, along with a risk assessment that takes into account the design of the industry and the typical forms of interaction and competition and so on. And says, okay, what is the requirement for financing? You know, what kinds of needs do they have? And then, how do we design an instrument, financial instruments, that will meet those needs? And then again, create some, prototype them, test them, redesign, reprototype, retest. And so it's, I think, going to be a tremendously exciting approach to a finance area that people think is, first of all, so exotic and so impenetrable and so highly quantitative, you know. But in fact, he's working on how can we create ways of representing complex financial instruments so that we can see the fundamental building blocks that they're composed of. And we can modify those, basically puts and calls, and how we can modify those and assemble them into complex instruments, such that in looking at them, you'd never understand, you'd never see that they were actually made up of these a few rather simple components. And so I think once we get that course going, that is going to be a really revolutionary kind of thing, making finance accessible to more students, first of all, accessible to the general public. And also, I think, making our graduates better able to construct new kinds of financial devices for the future. Because as a part of your design brief and functional specifications become issues of sustainability, issues of the dynamics of the complex systems that the firm has to deal with. So thinking in terms of systems, sustainability, complexity, and design, is that combination is something that we would hope we'll have in all of our disciplines.
Great. We'll send students. No problem.
Oh, good.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.